Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. Academic freedom and institutional autonomy have declined significantly in India since the Narendra Modi government came to power. We've observed a decline in all aspects of academic freedom after 2014. This has been emphasized by independent studies, but we don't need them to see what's going on. So, why is academic freedom important to society and indeed individual freedoms?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show Suhas Palshikar, an academician and social and political scientist. He is chief editor of the journal Studies in Indian Politics and is also co-director of the Lokniti program on comparative democracy, Center for the Study of Developing Societies. He taught at SP College Pune for 11 years and was a professor in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the Savitribai Phule Pune University from 1989 to 2016. He specializes in the areas of political process in India, politics of Maharashtra, and political sociology of democracy. Welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
You're very welcome, sir. And so, first of all, when we say academic freedom, what does the term imply?
Well, for various people, it would imply different things, but more generally and in a consensual manner, freedom of the students and teachers to study and teach the way they like, institutions in conducting intellectual activities and running the academic enterprises, as we shall be discussing in the course of our discussion, questions of curricula, questions of debate, all these include in the term academic freedom.
And so, why is academic freedom important for any society? And also, is it central to the higher education and its processes?
In a sense, academic freedom is always associated with the idea of higher education. But I would think that it's also a question of pedagogy and therefore right in school education as well. The way school curricula are framed is in a way connected to the question of academic freedom in the sense that it is the teachers and the academic community who should be formulating the curricula rather than some outsiders doing it. And in this sense, I would say yes, it is important for any society at any point of time because unless you have academic freedom, you cannot encourage the spirit of inquiry, which is the crux of education as one would ideally understand it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. So, is it accurate to say that academic freedom is a derivative of freedom of thought and therefore related to fundamental rights?
Yes, at least in our present context of constitutional democracies, academic freedom flows from the idea that there are rights to individuals as well as rights to groups. And from fundamental rights, if we take up just one example of right to freedom of expression, it in a sense includes the right to express oneself, express one's ideas, debate those ideas, and therefore it is a matter of, in a sense, fundamental right to pursue academic activity, to pursue the thinking process, and also the right to dissent. All these are included both in fundamental rights in a sense, but more particularly in the idea of what we talk of academic freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when there is a crackdown on academic freedom, how does it manifest itself on the ground?
Sometimes we have examples where academic freedom, in a sense, is curtailed very indirectly by bringing about pressures, bringing about influence, by creating a kind of hegemony of a particular way of thinking and approach. When we talk of crackdowns, it in a sense means that there is no holds barred situation. Teachers and students are told that they have to study this, they have to approach history or political science or social systems in a particular matter. There is, in other words, direct interference in framing of curricula, interference in appointments, for that matter, even interference in who should be invited as a guest speaker and who should not be invited as a guest speaker. Overall, I would say that this atmosphere of fear and intimidation is created so that neither the teachers nor the students, and definitely not the institutions, can function in a free atmosphere.
But why are we seeing such a lot of it now? What has changed?
In a sense, this is always an area of tension. The power of the state, the power of the government, political power, in other words, will always want a certain amount of control over the academia. They would always want a favorable academia. But in a democracy, there are inbuilt mechanisms to protect academic freedom. When they start collapsing, we talk of a crackdown of academic freedom or a failure of academic freedom. In the Indian context and in global context also, many countries in a sense are facing this slide down of academic freedom. As far as India is concerned, there has been a paradigm shift, as all of us know, since 2014 in our politics. Formally, the constitution has remained the same. The way we elect the government has remained the same. However, the elected government wants to establish a certain intellectual and ideological hegemony, not over just politics, a control over politics, but control over the way people think. There is a cult of authoritarian and majoritarian public opinion to be created. Added to that, there is a personality cult also. Now, these are all, in a sense, sure shot recipes of a society facing academic freedom's crisis, a crisis in the field of academia. In a sense, these are all antitheses of academic freedom. So, that is how we have landed up in a more critical situation than we could have imagined earlier.
And have we seen such a thing in the past in India?
As I said, there has always been a tension. There would always be efforts to control. If one wants examples, critics of the left front government in West Bengal have always pointed out that there was a considerable curtailment of academic freedom in West Bengal when the left government was ruling there. At the all India level, during the emergency, we get only a brief glimpse of, in a sense, an intrusion in academic freedom. But emergency is a special case also because it was a half hearted effort and a crass project of concentrating political power. The hegemony which I mentioned earlier, the ambition of hegemony, that was absent at that time. In a sense, there was a concentration of political power without the objective of changing the worldview of the entire population. That is happening now, and therefore, in our current atmosphere, we find that there are more attacks on academic freedom and more complaints of such attacks.
And what are the international examples of it down the ages?
Always, you can find many examples, but 100 years ago, for example, in Nazi Germany, the migration of a large number of academicians from Germany to various parts of Europe or particularly to the United States was a characteristic of suppression that they were experiencing in Germany that time. Following that, in the United States itself, during the McCarthy era, which is known after the name of a senator who established a committee to find out un-American activities among the American university scholars and academicians. This was in the 1950s at the beginning of the Cold War. So that was a time when even American intellectuals had a taste of some interference in their academic freedom. In Soviet Union and also the countries governed by or controlled by Soviet Communist Party during Stalin's era and after that, we find considerable constraints over academic freedom, and China even today continues to face this specter of academic freedom. Nearer home, Pakistan has always faced a very peculiar problem of how to shape their history textbooks, because for them, whether history begins with Sindh and therefore Mohenjo-daro, or whether history begins with 1947 is a big debate. And therefore, you will find that there will always be controls in such situations. And if you have followed the examples that I have given, you will find whenever an authoritarian streak emerges in the politics and governance of a society, academic freedom is jeopardized.
Right. So now let's come to some of the independent studies on the decline of academic freedom in India. Now they cite parameters like freedom to research and teach, freedom of academic exchange and dissemination, institutional autonomy of universities, freedom of academic and cultural expression, and campus integrity, which refers to the absence of security infringements and surveillance. Could you briefly talk us through them? What exactly are they referring to when they say all these things?
Such indexes are always presented as global indexes and they are always debated. Nevertheless, the criteria that you mentioned would be acceptable to almost anyone who is interested in the questions of academic freedom. As I said earlier, one initial element of academic freedom is freedom to research and teach. And therefore, if there are constraints on the research agenda of the research scholars, then there is definitely a control over academic freedom. This would happen mostly in what is known as literature, humanities, and social sciences. But this can also happen in the field of material and biological sciences when the government says that you have to do research in this particular field and not that particular field. This is linked to the entire politics of funding. The freedom of academic exchange and dissemination means what I write, let us say, about democracy as a student of politics, what I write about caste as a student of sociology, whether it is controlled by any governmental machinery or by vigilantes who are favorable to the viewpoint of the government, would determine if we have academic freedom of not or not. For example, when there are discussions about the glorification of caste, and when there are criticisms of those scholars who actually point to the oppression that caste as a system has brought about, there is definitely a limitation of academic freedom. Or take the simple example of inviting scholars. There have been cases where scholars are not allowed to enter India, and it has been officially stated by the government that scholars doing research in sensitive areas will be scrutinized when they come to India. This is definitely an infringement of academic exchange in terms of a free flow of give and take of institutions. As far as institutional autonomy is concerned, I must say that our record in India, not just during the current regime, but always, about institutional autonomy has been very weak. Universities have never had real autonomy, particularly state universities have found themselves under the control of both the central government as well as the state governments. And as a result of that, they are always in bad shape. Often there are rumors about the ways in which appointments are made to state universities. So I think institutional autonomy is probably the weakest link in India's history of academic freedom overall. And finally, the question of cultural expression and non surveillance of campuses was a practice but half-heartedly followed, and since it was half-heartedly followed, the current regime has found it easy to in a way disband it almost completely. So as I would like to say, historically I would not deny that academic freedom in any country has always been at odds with authority. Secondly, in India, the authorities have always tried to interfere, but there has been pushbacks from time to time, and there have been some legal constitutional mechanisms. And thirdly, currently we face the most critical moment as far as academic freedom in India is concerned.
That's very thought provoking, sir. And what comes to mind actually when you said these things, also the appointments that we are seeing to universities today are all being done through the filter of a certain political ideology, which is the RSS ideology. In my view, we are seeing a huge crackdown on student dissent. Anything that is uncomfortable to the government seems to be a target, and it's quite disturbing in my view. What's your view?
Oh, yes, while we are talking, there aren't going on any large student unrests and movements in universities. But in the past, recent past, we have had a number of universities facing this issue. Hyderabad, JNU, Delhi University, and Allahabad University, and so on and so forth. Now, this unrest of the students comes from a number of factors. Unemployability and substandard education is one basic factor behind that, but also the inability to express themselves clearly, fully, and also the replication of social power structures in terms of caste inequalities have always been what one can say elements that create students' unrest in India. Now, compare this with students' unrest in France in the 1960s. One finds historically a celebration of those students' unrests because they produced new ideas. They became revolutionary not because they were violent, they were, but they became revolutionary because they produced new ideas. And it is this production of ideas, production of knowledge, which is finally at the heart of university and education as a system.
Yeah, and I just wanted to keep take you up on that a little bit. I think it's an interesting line of thought. The production of ideas to this sort of dissent or turmoil or protest, however you want to view it. Now, obviously, when there's a crackdown on this sort of dissent, what you're also doing is suppressing ideas that are critical to the evolution of a society, aren't they? Isn't it?
Surely, we always keep complaining about lack of originality coming out from our university structures, whether in the physical and biological sciences or in the social sciences. But at the same time, we generally as a society don't allow novelty of ideas to bloom. We are happy just keeping to the established norms and practices. And therefore, when it comes to ideas, India's contribution, let us say in the past 6, 7 decades, has been very limited. There have been Indian scholars who went abroad and contributed to the field of ideas, to the field of sciences, and to various other fields. India has excelled mainly in technology rather than in the field of pure science, pure ideas, pure theorization. Then we start complaining that all knowledge is Western knowledge and we need to have Indian knowledge. But even Indian knowledge and knowledge system to bloom would require freedom, whether it is the medicinal knowledge of the traditional type in India or the social science knowledge and new ideas that might come up with a fusion of Indian thinking and Western thinking. This can happen only in a free atmosphere where a scholar or a student does not have to fear about the consequences, the social and cultural consequences or administrative consequences of her or his thinking and expression.
When we talk about this autocratization process, what do you think is coming up next? Do you think this will continue? Do you think this has a finite shelf life?
Well, that depends upon the larger trajectory of the future of democracy in our country. You cannot have academic freedom in isolation, and therefore, I don't see any immediate pushback from academic institutions unless they also take a holistic view of what is happening in the country. And therefore, I think if you ask me, a short term scenario is rather pessimistic in the sense that our universities and university lives would really become even more constricted, more limited in their freedom in the short term. There is always a possibility, of course, when it is an exercise in thinking, that new ideas would come up and catch the imagination of students as well as the general population.
So, what can India do to change what is happening? And often there is a sense that an individual can do nothing. But is there anything an individual can do?
See, at the individual level, particularly in the academic field, probably the greatest responsibility is now on individual faculty members, individual researchers, simply because institutions are not likely to help them in this fight back or pushback. So the pushback will come from new forms of ideas. We are already seeing such new forms around us, like through satire, like through, for example, cartoons, like, for example, creative writing. These will be the areas from where a new dawn will arise. But that will have to be as at the same time supported by the society at large. That is one, as I said earlier. There are two other caveats to this pushback. One is that finally there will have to be a larger body of individuals in the country to support different ideas, even if they don't like those ideas. There has to be a support from the media, for example, to these ideas. The media itself is in bad shape, but unless there is a support from the media, it cannot happen. And therefore, I think that it will take a long time for this fight back or pushback to happen. It can happen only once when the culture of dissent is accepted as part of our lives and part of our democratic system.
Now, sir, you've been a professor for several years and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of students. What is the mood among your students?
Frankly, I retired just at the time this entire political transition was taking place in the country. So I cannot either complain about or tell you about any experience of first hand intrusion in academic freedom. However, one thing I can tell you for sure, which is that students are generally restless because of want of enough opportunities of expression and articulation. That is something which is lacking. And I think with all the politics around academic freedom that we have, this is the crux of the matter, that we need to give more opportunities of articulation and expression for the students in their academic lives.
Sir, tell us about your work with the Studies in Indian Politics Journal and also the Lokniti program.
Sure. What happened was that 25 years ago, while working in the University of Pune, which is now named as the Savitribai Phule Pune University, I came across and met a number of colleagues outside of Pune who were also interested in studying Indian politics. And that is how the Lokniti was born. So, Lokniti is, in a sense, though a formal program at the CSDS, a network of around 40 to 50 scholars interested in studies of public opinion, empirical studies of democracy, political parties, and so on. Then in 2012, we decided to start a journal devoted to purely Indian politics in all its aspects. While, of course, there are journals studying Indian politics outside of the country, in India, there was no such journal. So we started that journal. It has been running for now 10 years. It is the 11th year now. And overall, this has been a fantastic experience of interacting with colleagues, deciding an agenda of the organization on your own without any outside interference. Lokniti doesn't depend upon any grants or funds from the government or any semi government body. All of us work pro bono, in a sense, like in the studies of Indian politics, also, whether an editor or even an editorial assistant, all are working free of any remuneration or without any remuneration. In a sense, that helps the economy of this entire enterprise also. Coming back to Lokniti, however, the ambition is, in a sense, to create enough empirical ground for analysis and theorization, which would then come from within India on the basis of Indian data and will not have to necessarily subscribe to the so-called global categories and global fashions. That is what the Lokniti intends to do by interacting globally, but at the same time acting mainly within the Indian context.
Right. So that brings me to the question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do the work that you do?
Oh, yes, that would be probably the toughest question that you have asked so far. I don't know. I mean, the answer which would look facetious would be that I like it and therefore I do it. As I told you, I don't draw any money or salary or honors from it. But yes, I do get to meet people, which is a happy moment. I do get response from the readers when I write, like for example, when I write in the public media, in the print media, I get public response just as I get public flogging. But I guess there is this interest, and unless one has an interest in the society around her or him, an interest in theorizing about it, and an interest in thinking of categories and ideas, one wouldn't do it. So I would say that it is mostly for a selfish reason that I feel happy of this pursuit, that I do it.
So the limiting of academic freedom is a worrying development. Thank you so much for coming on the show and helping us understand its implications.
No, no, I would be thanking you and the audience, in fact, because as you said, academic freedom is far serious a matter to be left only to the academics. The general public should be aware of it. When we send our students to schools and colleges and universities, we should know that these are the problems they are likely to face. And no society, however economic progress it may do, no society can grow unless there is academic freedom. And therefore, if our viewers, listeners, your audience get interested in these issues, feel strongly about it, I think this is a time well spent by both of us. So, thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in, for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.